Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it is my number 15 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Las Vegas Raiders. They were number 14 until Christian Wilkins left. Now they're number 15. It was a significant loss, but luckily they have some interesting pieces, I guess, throughout the roster already built in where it's not going to be felt so much, at least by my estimation. It will hurt certain aspects of their game, which we'll get to when we cover the defense, but a brand new coaching staff here for the most part. Pete Carroll's the new head coach. Chip Kelly's the new offensive coordinator. They got a new quarterback, Geno Smith, coming over from Seattle, rejoining Pete Carroll, the head coach that brought out the best in Geno Smith after all those years as being just sort of like a middling backup. All of a sudden, we got a top 10 quarterback on our hands. How about that, Pete Carroll? They drafted Ashton Jeanty in the first round. We'll talk about how exciting that's going to be, show a little bit of highlights of him as we go about. Just a beast, an absolute beast, recreating that Marshawn Lynch backfield, hopefully. A really good established offensive line that I actually really like. I don't know, maybe I'm too high on them, but I'm also pretty low on the weapons group. We'll get to them. Other than Brock Bowers, I don't really see a whole lot going on there. Same thing sort of for the defense to a large degree, at least from a pass defense perspective. Other than Maxx Crosby, what do they really have? There's a lot of competition brewing on the defensive side of the ball. You see the dog in the background. He's sniffing plants. He's out there. He's worried that the Raiders may not get it together this year and really make me look stupid for this ranking. But I think they have just too many strong pieces here in place. And from a head coaching perspective, they're bringing in just a great body here, a great culture builder, and that's Pete Carroll. Getting an 84 grade and being the 16th ranked head coach for, he took a year off and he was, at his age and what he was showing in Seattle, it kind of looked like he was on that downward trend to a degree. An all-timer as a head coach, great culture builder, historically, I guess, well-liked, and outside of one really bad coaching decision in a Super Bowl, I mean, it's hard to point to anything that he's done where it's a real head scratcher. And the concern is that when you bring in a coach like Pete Carroll, like I said at the top, is you're in this win now mode that I don't know that this team was necessarily ready for. I don't know if it was the right division for him to come into, but it's worth a shot. It's worth a shot for an organization that just hasn't been able to find its footing for 25 years at this point almost. And Pete Carroll at least brings a stable environment in. He understands players. He has all the experience in the world. He knows how to build a team. He knows how to do it quickly as well. He took over that team in Seattle, and they were just gangbusters after Mike Holmgren left. He brings in Chip Kelly to be his offensive coordinator, and this one is mildly questionable to me. Greg Olson's going to be the quarterback's coach. Joe Philbin's going to be a consultant. And then a couple of Pete Carroll's kids, from the looks of it, unless it's of no relation, are going to be some of the positional coaches. But the thing about Chip Kelly is that he's sort of the opposite of Pete Carroll, where he's not notoriously well-liked. He kind of fell off to a large degree when it comes to his level of production. He did return to the college game and sort of rebuilt himself from a scheme perspective, and he's coming in and he does run. It was a hire that made sense because he does run the kind of offense that Pete Carroll historically has wanted his team to run with that certain identity. That's why they went out and got Ashton Jeanty. That's why they go out and get Raheem Mostert, is because they want to be able to run the football, run it effectively, and have a running back who's capable of beating up an opposing defense the way Ashton Jeanty is, and also in turn being creative with like they can with Mostert, and even with Jeanty they can do that as well, using a lot of speed and all that out there, and being semi-inventive and creative on the offensive side of the ball. And that's something they're going to have to do as well, and you'll see that when we get to the weapons group, because they don't really have like these super high-end talents in that room. Like really outside of Brock Bowers, there's no one really that's mind-blowing or that is really going to strike fear in a lot of defenses. So in order to get those guys to produce at a high level based upon the number of snaps they're going to be getting every game, it does kind of require that Chip Kelly mentality of this hyper creativeness. And, you know, he he did wonders for a lot of players at the college level. And this seems to be a situation where it could be the first time that it truly works at a high level, at the professional level. And I think him being able to focus on just the offense as well is going to help. There's still a lot of trepidation in me about putting him too high because the bodies aren't there from a weapons perspective. So I don't know if that's going to cause his scheme to suffer or not. The offensive line is certainly in place really well there. The quarterback position is figured out with Geno Smith, who does have enough athleticism even at this stage in his career. He's not exactly Marcus Mariota in his college prime or anything, but it's still there. And then Pete Carroll is certainly in this situation going to take on that CEO role that he had in Seattle because he does have a top 10 defensive coordinator in Patrick Graham with him. He's sort of just outlived all these different regimes, it seems. Patrick Graham, he's very resilient, so to speak. He brought in Joe Woods to be part of his staff. He's got a couple other pretty interesting bodies there as position coaches and consultant roles. Patrick Graham just runs a really great defense, and losing Christian Wilkins does really hurt, I'm sure, his plans that he had, especially over the last couple of years where they didn't really get to use Christian Wilkins at all. He was such an integral piece of what the scheme was projecting to be at the very least. So it does draw some concern about what the interior of the defensive line could be and how he can make up for some of the deficiencies they're going to have in run defense right up the middle. They got a lot of unproven bodies there. The edge room is kind of in good shape, with Maxx Crosby and, Tyree Wilson and Malcolm Koonce coming off of an injury after having what, for all intents and purposes, a breakout season for him just previous to that. So maybe, Patrick Graham comes in and Pete Carroll does bring that experience. Pete Carroll is much more of a defensive guy anyway. So he gets to bring that experience over to Patrick Graham and maybe give him work on the nuances and whatnot. And Pete Carroll's notoriously been able to get the most out of the least as well, going back to his time in Seattle. Really good team builder. It's just, again, the concern comes in Pete Carroll is not here for the long haul. He's not like this Ben Johnson hire where it's this young guy where you could theoretically have him be your coach for the next 20 years. It could be not like a Mike Tomlin situation when he was hired or a John Harbaugh situation when he was hired. This is very much, we want to turn this around quick, and I wonder who is the long-term vision for this organization when you bring in Pete Carroll. And I'm sort of just going through some of the guys in the staff. Like, it wouldn't be Chip Kelly. Would it be Patrick Graham? Is this something where the front office saw something in Patrick Graham where they're like, this guy's got a lot of potential to be a great head coach. He just needs a little bit more guidance, a little bit more stability in the head coaching positions, because he's sort of bounced around head coaches for the last couple of years. So to get with Pete Carroll, I could see that being the long-term goal of the Raiders organization, is to just eventually turn it over to Patrick Graham after bringing in Pete Carroll to build a culture of stability that hasn't existed in this organization for, like I said, going on 2 decades at this point. So there's a lot of, I think you can have a lot of excitement about what the staff can bring. The concern would obviously be on the offensive side of the ball, though I do think it's still going to be a really good offense because of the scheme that they're going to run. They do have all the bodies in place to run that scheme very effectively. And I think coming out of a lot of 12 personnel, which seems to be the goal as well, that's going to just continuously open up opportunities, I think, for this offense to succeed. And I think the defense, for all intents and purposes, even though the talent level has been depleted over the last couple of years, they haven't really improved on any position groups over the last couple of seasons. I think from a coaching perspective and a scheme perspective, they've taken this now to a whole other level by adding Pete Carroll as the head coach. And I think the attitude that this team's going to have, you could find yourself getting back to that old school Raiders mentality to a degree, because you got to remember Pete Carroll was the coach of that Legion of Boom group, where they had guys like Cam Chancellor just ripping people's heads off, and they had these hyper personalities, these aggressive personalities like a Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Brandon Browning. So though they don't have the bodies, and we'll get to that, to at least from a projection standpoint to be able to pull that off this year, I think that you're going to quickly see which players fit the culture aspect of this team. I think that this season is going to be very much about Pete Carroll establishing the culture of the locker room and sort of letting a lot of positional competition sort of pave the way for what this roster is going to look like come next season. Though in any other year, I would say this team would be a true playoff contender with this coaching staff and this roster. That aspect of it kind of throws the overall player ratings almost to the side more so than any other team, because a good player, like we just saw it with Christian Wilkins, clearly there was a cultural issue with how he fit in with this team, with how he wanted to conduct himself with his injury, and Pete Carroll wasn't having it. And by all means, you guys have to understand, Pete Carroll did not come to this team to not be the guy making those types of decisions on the roster. So it was Pete Carroll going like, this doesn't fit what I want to do, get rid of him. So it really brings up an idea that not a lot of people, no one's really safe here unless Pete Carroll went out and got you, right? So unless your name is Maxx Crosby, if you're not an incumbent, especially on the defensive side of the ball, if you're an incumbent on the defensive side of the ball and you're not somebody that they've added themselves, I would watch out for that. But I think it's going to be an interesting, from a scheme perspective, what they do offensively and defensively, because I also don't think that Chip Kelly and Patrick Graham scheme up the same way either, offensively and defensively. I think it's two completely different styles. So we're going to see two different, how they meld those things together, how Pete Carroll brings those two styles together to create an overall game plan that makes sense for them. That's going to be something to watch as well. And I think that's another reason Pete Carroll is so important in this role, because he does have outrageous amounts of experience. So it should be something he's able to do relatively quickly, but it could be something that might be just too far gone, and parts of this staff may just not be fit for the long run, kind of like some of the players. Now, this is the part where we have an ad break, but I don't have any ads yet. We're so close, guys. You guys are doing so well. The ones of you that like all the videos, the ones of you that are already subscribed, you're doing great. This is for the people that aren't doing that. Please, 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 I want to not have a real job anymore. Please, like it, subscribe, so I can get ads. Thank you. Let's get back. One thing they went out and made sure they did was they established the quarterback position with someone Pete Carroll had a lot of faith in. It's Geno Smith, the guy who got turned around by Pete Carroll in Seattle. He comes in as 9th, maybe 10th at quarterback. He's been a top 10 quarterback in terms of his performances. From a overall team performance perspective, Seattle didn't have a whole lot of success. But as just a quarterback, he was out there, he was doing his job the way it was supposed to be done. So all the credit in the world to Geno Smith for that. And to watch him improve his game so drastically and so significantly the way that he did, it's just a testament to sometimes it just takes a little bit longer for some people. And, you know, his ability when given time, he was as good as any quarterback in the NFL when he had a clean pocket to work out of. And that comes from his ability to push the ball down the field, get to his second, third reads, look off safeties. When he's given that time, the veteran mentality that he's built up in all these years being in the league, sort of bouncing from culture to culture, scheme to scheme, he really put it all together in those years in Seattle to be a truly effective quarterback. Now, from the short route perspective, I don't know what really happens there, but to have 28 big-time throws, he did have 18 turnover-worthy plays, so that's just over-aggressiveness. But when he's under pressure, he's pretty on average with the rest of the league. He's not necessarily a true detriment or anything, but when he's blitzed and they don't get home, it's just another thing where he has such a grasp on the mental aspect of the game now that all the physical traits are now starting to click for him. And it's been obvious, you go year to year with him since he became the starter in Seattle, and compare him to the times where he played early in his career with the Jets, the game he got with the Giants, in the whole Ben McAdoo, Eli Manning debacle. It's like he's a completely different player altogether. And something happened where it just clicked for him. He learned something in the film room. He learned something on the practice field or in training camp that allowed all of his physical traits that had him be so... I wouldn't say he was super well thought of coming into the league, because he was a second-round pick in he was considered a weak quarterback draft. But I think in modern NFL, he probably would have been, with the way that he was being projected and the skill sets that they were talking about him having, and just the upside that he had coming into the league, he probably would have been a first-round pick the same way we saw Jackson Dart be a first-round pick this year. And then E.J. Manuel would have gone way sooner. But I just love watching him throw, and he can fit those deep balls in such tight windows. We saw him do that with Tyler Lockett so many times. Just Lockett would run those skinny posts, and he would just put it, drop it in the tiniest of baskets for him in coverage, just getting it over the top of the safety, dropping right into Lockett's hands, and then he has the sure-handed Tyler Lockett to complete the play. Granted, he's never worked with a weapons group that is this poor in terms of high-end talent. You know, he had DK Metcalf, he's had Tyler Lockett, he had JSN last year. He's had a deep group for a majority of his run there, a deep running back room and everything. And now coming in, other than Brock Bowers, like we discussed earlier, there isn't this super high-end talent. Now, he's got Jacoby Myers, where when we'll get to him, he sort of will play. He's been less and less of a slot receiver since coming to the Raiders. I could see in this new system him going back to that role he had in New England, where it's mostly in the slot, especially because they've added so many of these guys that are more outside wide receiver types. But how Geno Smith spreads the ball around and how he utilizes these wide receivers, because he's getting a lot of inexperienced wide receivers as well, as you'll see. You know, guys on the younger end, you know, not even still on rookie contracts, just drafted into the league. The only one that's going to get significant playing time that has a lot of experience is going to be Jacoby Myers. So how quickly he can get these guys up to speed and figure out their tendencies and the timing of everything, that's going to fall on the mental aspect of the game for him, and his patience and his understanding of just how the league works and how player development works. And I think he does have a really good grasp on that at this point. I mean, everything he's shown in his run in Seattle has been completely evident. It's been just evidence of that. So I'm not remotely concerned with the quarterback position here with the Raiders. And I think that he's at a position where he's good enough where the offense is got such a high floor to it, especially when you pair up the running game with him. One thing he's always had is he's had competent running backs. Now he's working now with the best offensive line that he's had probably since he became a starter in Seattle. I can't really think of those Seattle offensive lines that he's had the last couple of years where I went, that was a really good offensive line. Now he's getting one of the best offensive lines in the league the last couple of seasons, you know, with Colton Miller and Jackson Powers-Johnson and Dylan Parham and DJ Glaze, who had a good year last season. This is the best offensive line he's had in a long time. Probably the best offensive line he's had as a starter. So his ability when he's kept clean and having a good blitz pickup and everything, he could potentially really pick apart some defenses if his weapons group can perform and start getting some separation downfield and be consistent in the timing of their routes and be on the same page when it comes to some of the option routes that they're going to run. But I could see that the more experienced, better players being the ones in charge of that anyway, like Myers and Bowers. But then there's other guys like Michael Mayer who needs to get involved, and I think he's just got a nice little... It's not a high-end talent, but I think if he can be kept clean and navigate the field, we're going to see some of these guys really amp up around him. And I think that's an important quality for a quarterback to have, is the ability to make people around you better. And I think he's really got that trait nailed down. And we'll see how that works out now that he's actually going to be in charge of doing that. Because, you know, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were really just established guys at that time. But then last year, JSN had a great year. So can he do for these guys what he did with JSN just a year ago. So like I said, it's my 31st ranked weapons group. Because other than Brock Bowers, it does lack this high upside talent that it's tough. It's tough to see who outside of Bowers is going to be the guy. The safe assumption is that it's Jakobi Meyers. He's got the experience, and to a large degree, I find Jakobi Meyers to be incredibly underrated. He took a beating. I don't know how many times I've said this in previous videos. He's taken a real beating for that horrific play when he was on New England, ironically against the Raiders, where it was a tie game and he didn't need to make a big play and he decided to lateral it by throwing it across the field. Just a horrible decision, and then Chandler Jones got it and scored as the clock ran out. Unfortunately, that play is haunting him until he has this true monster season. And he had a great season last year. He didn't drop a single pass. I think that's amazing considering the amount of targets he got. A 90.9 passer rating when he's targeted. He executes deep down the field and in the intermediates and in the short areas just really well. He's a really good versatile receiver who, again, you look at playing out wide 66% of the time to 34% in the slot. That is something that flipped when he arrived with the Raiders. That's not something that he was consistent in, and when the Raiders signed him to the contract that they did when he came from New England. He came over from New England as like the primary slot receiver. So now he's sort of flipped in that role. So I don't know if that is going to necessarily help him grow as a player in this offense with Geno. I think it may, just because there's so many question marks in the other wide receivers, like the pure wide receivers. And when you have Brock Bowers who can play in the slot as well as he can, you need that outside threat. But to be able to move Jakobi Meyers around, now I know I'm going to get crap. I can hear it already. To move him around the way like the Vikings do with Justin Jefferson, where you can line him up outside primarily, but then you kick him into the slot and he's got that experience in him where he can be a really effective slot receiver as much as he can be an effective outside receiver. That may raise his game to another level, raise his production up, even if he doesn't have like this particularly breakaway speed or he's not really shifty or anything like that. He's basically sort of established himself as this larger slot-ish, slot-adjacent wide receiver who can win a lot of contested catches. You see it right there, 66.7% contested catch win rate, 16 total contested catches won. He doesn't drop the ball, 0 drops. You know, his yards after the catch, though, I think that's why him shifting to an outside, like not getting the opportunities to have a lot of run after the catch because you're primarily in that out wide role. Maybe they change that around and make him like a slot more often to allow him to get more run after the catch. I wonder how they're going to work him in that sense. Now, they did invest in the draft class to get some wide receiver help, and it starts with the rookie Jack Besh from TCU, who there was a lot of hoopla around him, and you know he had a good year. He's another guy who only had 1 drop on 91 targets. Didn't have like this high level production. He had a really good average per reception, 62 catches over 1,000 yards. He had 9 touchdowns. But again, not a lot of run after the catch, primarily an outside wide receiver. Can play in the slot a bit. They can mix him in there for some matchup things. But he seems to be the guy that they picked out to be the true outside receiver of this group. At least it seemed that way until you go and you look at the depth chart, the official depth chart of the Raiders, and you see that there's a rookie by the name of Dante Thornton who's out there, who's listed right now as the starter, along with Trey Tucker and Jakobi Meyers. Now, with Thornton, I don't think that he's as good of a player as Jack Besh, which is why I give Jack Besh. I feel like by the time the season starts, Besh is going to be the guy. You play him with Trey Tucker, and I think that there's a nice little mixture of talents here, and I could see there being a relationship developed between Trey Tucker and Geno Smith, very similar to what we saw with Tyler Lockett, because I get a lot of Tyler Lockett vibes, like early young Tyler Lockett vibes from Trey Tucker. Let me guys know in the comment section what you guys think of that comparison. I think that it's pretty spot on. But again, between Besh and Tucker and Thornton and Keaton and Wilkerson, it's like you have this mixture. Now, I know that for the most part, they're going to be operating out of 12 personnel just because of the way the roster is built, with Michael Mayer maybe being more of a traditional tight end, and then Brock Bowers sort of playing this H-back slot type role because he only took 26% of his snaps from a traditional tight end position. Now, he had 60 contested catches on 148 targets. Didn't get into the end zone as much as you'd hope, but he did a lot of the grunt work out there for the receiving game just a year ago. And now with the quarterback that he's got, I don't know if it's possible for him to do better than what he just did, because like these are absurd numbers for a season. Like, you can't say, oh, he's going to do better. I think he can repeat this performance, certainly. I wonder how he'll be utilized in the red zone, because I can see Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly wanting to do more of a run the ball into the end zone, like Marshawn Lynch and Chris Carson, a la that era with Ashton Genty. But man, Bowers is really he exploded into the league as like this super athlete he's out there and he's too big for safeties to cover. He's way too fast for linebackers to cover. He bullies nickel corners in space and in those tight spaces and contested catches areas, and he was everything and more than what the hype was for him coming in. And he plays very much like you saw, like prime Travis Kelce and those types of players, where you get him the ball and he's a number one receiver that just happens to play tight end, like quote unquote. He's got the tight end body, the tight end strength, the tight end responsibilities to a degree. I don't know how much he's going to play as a true slot receiver in this offense, because like I said, I expect with Pete Carroll coming in and Chip Kelly there, I expect there to be this 12 personnel going on here, because they have to figure out a way to utilize Michael Mayer, because if they weren't, they would have gotten rid of him, right? There was plenty of people offering for Michael Mayer, and they just said, we're not getting rid of him. So clearly there's a plan in place for Brock Bowers to be a bigger slot, and then Michael Mayer to be the inline tight end, or maybe even vice versa. But I think having that versatility available to the play caller and to the quarterback, I think it's going to make for a fun offense to watch in a lot of aspects. The concern is that it's just outside of him. Where's this game breaker? You look at all these other weapons groups that are considered the true great weapons groups. They got a little bit of everything at a decently high level. Like we just covered Minnesota. They have Justin Jefferson, they have TJ Hawkins, and they have Jordan Addison. 3 different players that perform at high levels. Granted, they've been in the league a little bit, so maybe it's a little too early to be judging these guys. But again, when I bring up the whole Pete Carroll hire, you bring in Pete Carroll, like is him just getting these young guys up to speed and used to the NFL way his sole role in all this? And is this year sort of just a throwaway to get these guys to that place and figure out who fits in where? And you can throw in Raheem Mostert as a pretty good option, a good veteran option out of the backfield here. But I don't know that, even though I would classify him as a better receiving back, I don't know that he beats out Ashton Genty for too many snaps this year. My fear is that they're going to just lean too much on Genty because this weapons group is just a little too weak, and they just don't count on it outside of Brock Bowers, and they run the ball 65% of the time this year just to open up play action passes, and then you don't really get to utilize Geno as like this great quarterback and Brock Bowers as this great offensive weapon, because you're so concerned about none of these guys being able to make space for themselves to be able to be utilized properly. When you turn into the running game, they are 12th or 13th coming in. Ashton Genty is an absurd prospect. We talked about Cam Scadabo's numbers being just absurd to look at. Well, the Boise State running back has even more absurd numbers than that. Almost a perfect balance of zone and gap runs, so you don't need to worry about accounting for him in that sense. Almost 2,600 rushing yards and 29 touchdowns 152 forced missed tackles, 1,970 yards after contact. I don't even know where to begin with this guy. Like, the fact he didn't win the Heisman with this kind of production, and I get you give it to Travis Hunter because he's got the both sides of the ball thing going on. But when are you ever going to see a year like this again? And I completely understand why he went as high in the draft as he did. It makes total sense, especially with the type of team that they're clearly building to become. My concern is, like what I just said, is that the passing offense is just not going to have the bodies out there to warrant teams not just stacking the box every play and playing man coverage on the outside, knowing that they don't have these like particularly great separators, and then just kind of hoping that you can lock down Brock Bowers enough at the line of scrimmage to open up for a free runner in the event that it's a pass. And you stack the box against Ashton Jeanty, and you just hope for the best at that point. Make Geno Smith and Trey Tucker and all those guys beat you, rather than letting Ashton Jeanty just dictate the pace of the game for you, and then you're way behind the eight ball at that point. And I think they have done a good bringing in Raheem Mostert. This veteran speed guy runs really great zone offenses. He could be a fun little piece. I don't doubt that there won't be situations where they're in 12 personnel or 22 personnel with Jeanty and Mostert on the field with Bowers and Mayer, and then you just have Jacoby Myers out there. I think that there's going to be a lot more of that than maybe people are going to expect. And then it just creates a scenario where you can really run anything at that point. You can run a play action boot. You got good receiving backs. You got two good receiving tight ends. And you got a wide receiver, the only wide receiver on your team that's truly coming in as a reliable veteran. I think having Zamir White in there, I could see Zamir White being somebody Pete Carroll really likes. I wonder what kind of opportunities he's going to get. Sincere McCormick has sort of just hovered so far under the radar, but he's a sneaky, interesting player to have. So I don't know if his age will help him maybe poach some snaps from Raheem Mostert. I doubt it. But at the end of the day, you have to anticipate that 80% of the carries are going to Jeanty. You took him where you took him for a reason. You're expecting him to be Saquon Barkley. You're expecting him to be Bijan Robinson. You're expecting him to be in that class of player. And both of those players entered the league and finished their rookie season considered to be top 5 to top 8 running back in the entire league. So that's the expectation. The expectation is that he produces the most out of anyone on this offense, I would say. Even Brock Bowers, to a large degree. Because I think he's going to get a lot. I think he's going to get a lot of touches. The goal, I feel, for his rookie season is going to be to get him at least 25 touches a game. In some way, shape, or form. Whether you manufacture them in a play-action screen game or whether you're just turning around and handing him the football and letting him do some damage. And the offensive line is going to have their work cut out for them here, but thank goodness it's a good one, because you would hate for him to be in a situation where he's going to a team where he doesn't have this great offensive line. Even though in college he was able to force so many missed tackles, there also is the concern with Jeanty about the level of competition. Until you look at him play some of the better teams and you went, oh, he was still scoring 3 touchdowns in those games. He was still rushing for 90 yards in those games. It just wasn't against these doormat teams where he was running for 250 yards and 6 touchdowns or whatever, like you saw him do in the first week of the year. So the level of competition, I guess, can be a concern if you're being nitpicky, but he just seems like such a can't miss talent for this offense. And I think that it's something Geno is going to be able to really lean on and open up opportunities in the play action game that could potentially save this offense from a passing perspective from falling victim to just the lack of talent in the receiving weapons area. But what an offensive line this is. And it is my 7th best pass blocking, 9th best run blocking offensive line. This is what raises the tide for all ships. This is how you create a effective passing offense without having great high-end wide receivers. by having an offensive line that allows a quarterback that's proven when given time, he could be the best quarterback in the league, as good as the best. Now, we will go into some notes a little bit here as we go along, because I know that if you go and you look at the depth chart currently, there's a guy here that I have listed as a starter, ironically listed as probably the best offensive lineman on the whole team as a starter. But we'll get to that shortly. We'll start with the left tackle, Kolton Miller, and he's just a really great left tackle. He's a reliable pass blocker. He's a good run blocker. He does it all for this team. And this was probably the best draft pick that John Gruden made as the head coach of the Raiders when they took Kolton Miller. He hovers under the radar. He's not this super exciting left tackle like, say, Jordan Mailata or Tristan Wirfs, because those guys just do things that blow your mind. Kolton Miller isn't at that level. He falls into that like tier 2 of pass blocking left tackle, where he's never going to be the liability on the field. He's always just going to be solid. It's just when you need something spectacular, he's just not going to be the guy that gives you spectacular, which I guess is not that big of a deal. It's not like Laramie Tunsil and those guys, Andrew Thomas, who just do these amazing, spectacular things. Like, I don't know if you put him up against the greatest edge rusher in the league that he's going to just dominate that guy, but he'll play more than good enough where it won't allow that one player to just destroy the entire offensive strategy for an entire game. I think that's an important feature of him. Then you get to the guy who I'm higher on than Raider organization is, because they brought in Alex Kappa, who I don't know if I could be lower on him. And right now he's listed as the starter here over Jordan Meredith, who in the playing time he got last year, he was the best offensive lineman on the field almost every week. He took 3 penalties in 400 snaps, never gave up a sack. So he was taking on, one-on-one, taking on these interior defensive linemen, not really giving it up at all. Just a really solid performance in the pass blocking aspect. And from a run blocking perspective, I mean, another great performance. They focused mostly on zone, and he did really well at that. He wasn't like this elite level run blocker like Chris Lindstrom or anything, but on 175 snaps to just perform as well as he did in that period of time, I don't see how he's not winning the starting job here, especially when you're looking to get more into the run game. Alex Kappa hasn't been a good performer in a long time. So I don't know if it's just because they don't have any point of reference on him, because, between him and Kappa's definitely a more well-known guy. But if you can tell me the last time Kappa had a good season, I'd love to hear it. And you mix in there, you get the center Jackson Powers Johnson, who is basically like the Kolton Miller of centers. He's still a young guy. He's still got some space to develop and everything. But again, he's just a solid, reliable guy, a little bit undersized, but you can say the same thing about the guy next to him, Dylan Parham, as well. And I think that, sometimes it takes a little bit extra time, but he's built a nice little foundation here, a really high floor in his performances that I really like. Now, the issue that he fell into, and I think it's, it's size and length and all that, is he took 14 penalties. That hurts his grades across the board, is to take that many penalties. You can't be out there taking that many penalties. That means that, your feet are stiff. You're not punching and extending properly, or you're committing too quick. You're not letting things come to you in pass coverage as much as you should. You're not picking up blitzes. You're not using your eyes. You're not keeping your head on a swivel the way that you should. You end up reaching, grabbing, and illegal hands to the face, holding penalties, all that. So that's something he needs to start cleaning up, and that's a technique issue more than anything else when it comes, especially from a center. But just like Jordan Meredith, when they were running that zone, it was really great. So I could see Chip Kelly coming in, running some of that zone offense, and this being a really effective offensive line opening up holes, because one thing Jackson Powers-Johnson does bring is he's a really good athlete. So his ability to get to the second level is a real asset. You pair that up with Dylan Parham, who is another really good run blocker here. They built a really good offensive line. A lot of patience with some of these guys picking for upside. I think this is a good thing for the Carroll regime to inherit here. So I really like Parham. I feel like it's still just shocking to me that interior offensive line isn't just settled business. Then you got DJ Glaze, who had a better than expected season, that's for sure. Definitely a better than expected season. Beat out Thayer Munford for the starters reps. Just again, serviceable, young. You let him develop and see what sort of comes of it. They did draft Charles Grant as sort of a insurance policy. And Charles Grant, to me, you see the 75 grades there. I really liked Charles Grant coming out. The highlights I saw of him, I was like, this guy's actually pretty great. I don't know what other than level of competition that punishes him, but clearly he was. Caleb Rogers, same thing. But they're both listed as backups right now at their given positions. So that kind of throws Will Putnam. I think he's the guy that's sort of the odd one out here, as they'll probably keep 9 offensive linemen. So, but I mean, you watch Glaze, if he can't repeat what he did last year, if he starts to fall off a bit, and Grant sort of the next one up, I would watch for him to be sneaky effective, but moving to the right tackle spot. He's currently listed as the backup left tackle to Colton Miller. And I expect Jordan Meredith to beat out Alex Kappa. If they start Alex Kappa over Jordan Meredith, then you know what? They deserve to lose. So overall, they're still my 7th ranked offense, 18th offensive coordinator. With the offensive line, with Geno, and it's still the 11th ranked passing offense for me. Now imagine what they do if they get a breakout star out of that wide receiver room this year. Then it enters easily into the top 10 for passing offenses. So I wouldn't be too scared away by that group. I think that they'll be able to put together an offensive scheme using the players that they got to be effective. And then the rush offense, tied for 9th, 10th-ish. Definitely top 10, though. Depends on what kind of personnel they're running and how much they're using the depth of the running back room. Kind of changes where it would rank, but nitpicky stuff there. It's an offense that's ready to go and ready to perform from a talent level for sure. Now the defensive side of the ball got all the question marks on it. Good question marks, good competition. And we're going to talk about competition a lot because that's what the whole group is. The only competition that doesn't exist is really at that first edge room. Not the first edge room, the first edge position. Edge number 1, well-established, league veteran, league awesome guy, top level, elite level player. Maxx Crosby is the star of this group. And there's not a whole lot else going on around him with Christian Wilkins gone. They're 23rd in pass rush, 18th in run defense. When they had Wilkins, they were definitely top 20 in pass rush, and they were top 15 in run defense, which is a significant difference. It's a significant change for sure. Changes up your interior rotation specifically. But with Maxx Crosby, getting back to him, 92 as a pass rusher. You're looking for him to bounce back in terms of his pass rush production. But everyone's allowed a down year, especially when, again, no help. He's carrying this defensive line to a large degree. When Kuntz went out, that made things a little bit worse there. You had Kayvon Chase on, who had a pretty good season, working one-on-ones all year. But you need somebody who's going to attract the double team every now and then just to give this guy a chance to produce, right? But luckily, he does attack the football really well. He gets up there to bat the ball down. He understands when to use his hands. I think there's a lot with younger pass rushers in particular where they kind of lose their ability to. They're so focused on getting to the quarterback that they don't really see a lost cause. Like they don't have that internal clock where they go, I feel like the ball should be out by now. and then sort of collect themselves with their vision and with their hands and maybe get their feet back underneath them a little bit. I think Crosby does that really well, which makes him so effective in the run game as well. But 5 batted balls allows him to anticipate the throw from the quarterback and not just have his head down trying to get around him and the quarterback just throws it by him. I think that's a good feature for him to have. And, him and TJ Watt are sort of the best two at that, coming off the edge that I can think of off the top of my head. But it also helps him in the run game quite a bit. He's one of the better run defending edge players. Had probably his worst year as a run defender last year in a long time. But I give him credit for his mental toughness. I think that's super important for him. And you want to look at his leadership qualities here, which you can't really grade him on. Because when you get to what this group is, it's a lot of young, unproven guys that he's sort of here having to a large degree, carry. Like, you look at Malcolm Kuntz, he was a great compliment to him. But coming off the injury, you just got to hope that you really got to hope with Malcolm Kuntz that he can get back to what he was, because he had a really great year 2 years ago. And the concern is that when you pick up these types of injuries, these season-ending injuries, that guys never really get back to what they were. But he's going to get all the opportunities in the world to be that, because there isn't anybody else that can rush the passer off the edge. Unless, for some reason, Tyree Wilson, who was brought in as like this bigger 3-4 end, big outside linebacker, big defensive end type of a player. He was brought in to be that, and he was horrific in his rookie year. He bounced back to a large degree from a run perspective. From a pass rush perspective, he picked up 5 sacks, but it just wasn't a thing for him. I think him playing so much as an outside snaps and not playing over the tackle, especially in pass rush situations, I think is just a detriment to what his skill set is. He was sort of this guy that was picked by the previous regime for his upside, and he was always going to be a project. And, I don't know how much he truly fits into Patrick Graham's defense, but you hope that Pete Carroll can find a role for him, because I think he carved out a really nice spot for himself as a run defender. He was 14th in stops percentage just last season. And I know that ranking, these rankings with pass rush win percentage and stops percentage in particular, can be a little misleading, but it's a good sign for a guy who took as many snaps as he did from a variety of different spots. So you at the very least have a guy you can have as like a base defensive end in early down situations, and allow Malcolm Kuntz to sort of sit there on the sidelines and just keep fresh for the pass rush situations. And you can also have these bigger pass rush sets with Adam Butler, Tyree Wilson, Maxx Crosby, and Malcolm Kuntz as your 4-man line. Adam Butler, he's sort of just thrust in here. Him and Leki Fotu are basically thrust in here as the 2 nose tackles, I guess. And then they added 2 rookies in Tonka Hemingway. But J.J. Peegs, now that we have lost Christian Wilkins, that's a huge opportunity for him. Now, he's not really high right now on the current depth chart, but I think he has like this great capability to jump in and be a starter and get starters reps. I think he's somebody that can take advantage of the opportunity of clearly no one's safe. No veteran has a defined spot. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Charles Snowden, who I do also really love as at least an early down run defending edge player. I do think he's slightly lesser of an overall player than Tyree Wilson is. I think Tyree Wilson's size plays a good role in why he's going to get more playing time. I think his contract and draft position as well, they're going to want to see that through. But I think Snowden's at least a really underrated and is going to be able to show. I think he's going to get sneaky amounts of playing time because of how well he's going to play in the run game. And Pete Carroll's just going to love that. And he's going to encourage that to get on the field a lot more, especially if Malcolm Kuntz doesn't perform as a pass rusher, then that's the guy who I think is going to lose out on the playing time to Snowden. Because I think if Snowden and Kuntz have very similar pass rushing abilities this year, I think Snowden's run defense is sort of undeniable in comparison. So he could sneak in and get some playing time there as well. Jonah Lalau and Zach Carter. Zach Carter is almost more Tyree Wilson's backup in the way that this roster is sort of shaping up. So I don't know that he necessarily will get this crazy amount of playing time because he's not as good of a run defender. He's certainly not as good of a pass rusher either, because he sort of has this interior defensive line mentality to his game, but doesn't have necessarily the same size that you would get out of a traditional interior guy. And I think the same thing can be said for, Jonah Lalau is, I don't know where he sort of fits in here because he's not really outshining anyone that is part of this group either. And I think that they would lean more towards a JJ Peegs anyway to get him some experience. And as he comes in better than Lalau anyway. The only one is Leki Fotu, who I just don't rank that high, but he's such a large individual that I could see him getting some short yardage work throughout the year over a lot of these guys just from a space eating perspective. But this group is in need, kind of like the weapons group, of a second person to break out as a star. Because they have a star in place. They have Maxx Crosby, Brock Bowers, whatever. Who's the potential guy that's going to break through? Who's it going to be? It very well could be Tyree Wilson. I think Charles Snowden has a really undercover chance of being that guy as well. Now, talk about a bipolar group. It's the linebacker room, who come in terms of pass coverage as 31st in the league. But when they added Jermaine Pratt, it jumped them up to being about 4th to 6th in terms of run defense for me. They've put together this old school linebacker group, and we'll start with a Landon Roberts, who, from a run defense perspective, has always just been this really solid player. Now, he didn't get an exorbitant amount of playing time last year in Pittsburgh, sort of on and off there. But when he was out there playing, he was as great of a traditional linebacker as you can get, as in really great against the run, and good Lord, close your eyes and hope for the best in pass coverage. Didn't play well in zones, didn't play well in put in man-to-man situations. He was targeted 23 times, 17 catches given up for 244. Didn't give up a touchdown, though. So let's say that that's a positive for him. But his bread and butter is the run defense aspect, playing that traditional Mike linebacker role. He'll get the green dot, I would anticipate, at least for the first half of the season. I think he's just a really good veteran player who... He is what he is. He came into the league sort of this guy, and he improved as a run defender and never really got better as a coverage linebacker, which, not everyone could be Fred Warner. I get that. Then you get Jermaine Pratt, who comes in. He's kind of the same type of player. Now, I've always felt that Jermaine Pratt is a tad overrated. He had one good, quote unquote, good year with Cincinnati, got paid, and then went right back to being this guy who you go, I guess he's a linebacker too, I guess. And in this linebacker group, he actually fits in really well. So sort of the same way he did in Cincinnati next to Logan Wilson. I think that there was just this misconception that people were sort of rating him as this linebacker one. He was this elite level backer, and he was so great. He's a good run defending linebacker who has athletic traits enough to make splash plays in pass coverage, but he's also going to get picked on significantly, as you saw just last year. 79 times targeted, 62 catches, 660 yards, given up 3 touchdowns. His athleticism, again, bailed him out a couple of times with some interceptions and pass breakups, but 103.5 passer rating when targeted. He's just a poor man's version, to me, of a Landon Roberts in terms of run defense, which fits perfectly in this defense, ironically. Then you look at some of the depth here, and there just really isn't anyone in the depth here that can contribute in pass coverage other than the recently signed converted safety Jamal Adams, who kind of fell out of favor when they wanted to convert him to linebacker. Now Pete Carroll brought him in and said, all right, can we convert you to linebacker? And it looks like that's something he's settled in on doing as an inside linebacker now. And considering just the lack of high-end talent in the coverage aspect, I think Jamal Adams fits in here as that dime linebacker, where he's got the aggressiveness and the size to pull off playing like a modern-day NFL linebacker. He's just got a bit of a safety mentality to him, which I think would help him in the dime linebacker situation when they want to get smaller. And I think, he can play a good quarterback spy role, a good middle zone role, sort of playing basically the same role he was playing as a safety, now just as a straight up linebacker. I think he's the one that is the only real threat to that. I also really like the rookie Jalen Walker in run defense. Now, Tommy Eichenberg sort of had his role sniped here by Lindenberg and Walker as the two rookies coming in here, because he was sort of going to be that run defense guy, and maybe he can develop into something in the passing game. Now with Walker and Lindenberg in there, Walker I think comes in immediately better than all these other guys. I think he's a solid linebacker 3 if they ever want to run like a traditional base defense. I think that's something to watch out for. But if he can develop, if him or Lindenberg develop in pass coverage as well, then I think that that's where they're going to get their playing time, because neither one I don't think is going to come out and be better than Roberts or Pratt in terms of run defense right away. And I think as the season goes on, you'll see them get worked in more and more. You like to have that healthy rotation at linebacker and interior defensive line in particular, especially on those early downs. You want to save your best players for the key situations. So as they get more experience, again, it's an open competition here in this linebacker group, just like it is in the interior defensive line, just like it is for edge number 2. And between all these guys, you could see any combination of these guys really at the end of the day. It all depends on how Pete Carroll feels they fit in, the little adjustments he's going to make to Patrick Graham's system, and how Patrick Graham then gives more opportunities to certain guys that he's had the last couple of years, like Bernie and Eichenberg, and how he works in all these new faces they have at the linebacker position. It's a lot of turnover in this position group, and I think that opens up a lot of doors for a lot of players. And I think finding just the 2 best guys, they've set themselves up where they are going to be able to do that very effectively. Now, here's the huge concern is the defensive backs. There's not a lot to cover here, to be honest. They brought in Eric Stokes, the veteran. They had Jacorian Bennett. They got Mello Dotson, a rookie. They have DeMacarian Richardson, Sam Webb. Darnay Holmes is going to get some slot work for sure. Isaiah Polamau is going to be one of the starting safeties here. And then there's really the only 2 guys we're talking about. And we'll start with the rookie Darian Porter, who I loved in college. What a year. He had almost 400 snaps and only got targeted 17 times, give up 5 catches all year. I mean, again, we'll talk about the level of competition and all that, sure. But what a season before injuries and all that take him away from us. You know what I mean? I think, being in college as long as he has, hurts his draft stock, sure. But I love Darian Porter, and I think the Raiders might have gotten a pretty significant steal here, like a Tariq Woolen level steal here in the draft. His ability in zone coverage to be able to, scope out and anticipate, he did really well at that. Again, you always worry about the man coverage, especially in rookies coming up to the NFL, because they will get grabby, even though he took no penalties last year in over 400 snaps, almost 400 snaps. You know that he's going to start taking some penalties, get grabby, and playing corner is really, really hard at the next level. It's up and down, up and down. So how he rides the waves that is the performance level of an NFL corner is going to be the thing to watch for him, because they do have so many bodies. I think Mello Dotson is another body. You could really look at him to be sneaky good in this situation as well. But it's still the 27th-ish, 28th coverage group for defensive backs, which is really going to force them to be super creative in Patrick Graham's part. And also, it's going to require that front four to do a lot of work here. Then you got Jeremy Chin, who's basically been brought in to replace Trevon Merrick. because he's basically did all last year for Washington what Merrick did for this team last year, which is he sort of played everywhere. Now he's a hard-hitting, sure tackler, decent run defense. You know, sometimes makes the wrong decision, sometimes makes a good decision. I think he's good in those intermediate areas and zone coverage. Certainly good enough to get starters reps here and be the top guy. You worry about him getting beat, just not having the long speed, because the one criticism of Jeremy Chinn is sort of the same criticisms that previously to him a guy like Eric Reed would get, which is they aren't these great sideline to sideline athletes, so they can't really go back and play a deep third. Like, he can go back and be a deep safety in a cover 2, but he's not going to be that guy that play like that cover 3 or if they're in cover 1 man, when he's not going to be that deep safety ever. That's just not going to be what he does. He doesn't have that high level athleticism to make up for, depth issues or being on one hash and having to get over to the other the way that you'd see some of the great safeties like a Jesse Bates be able to do. That's just not what Jeremy Chinn does. Isaiah Polamau, I think, would take over that role. He's going to be the deep third safety here, but I think it also opened up opportunities for Thomas Harper and Chris Smith, and even converting one of these corners to a safety role. Again, we talk about the linebacker room, all this open competition. The same thing is said here for the defensive backs room. There's so much turnover in those two position groups from just last year with this new regime that it really is all out in the open. You know, they specifically sought out Porter in the draft. He's the best corner, so I think he's sort of undeniable here. Jeremy Chinn was sought out in free agency, so they clearly have a defined role for him. They brought in Eric Stokes to be an outside corner. Jacorian Bennett's already there. Mello Dotson drafted. So there's a lot of guys here where their role's not guaranteed. So there's going to be... I know that Buffalo got Hard Knocks. I would have loved to see this team on Hard Knocks this year, just because of having this type of competition on the defensive side of the ball. How exciting would those training camp highlights be of these position drills and how aggressive they're going to play in like 7-on-7 and all that. And you know, it's going to be, I hope somebody posts video of this. I hope there's a stream somewhere, because I would love to watch it, because to have this much competition brewing in these position groups in particular, it's going to be violent. It's going to be aggressive. And you know Pete Carroll loves that stuff. And Patrick Graham loves that stuff. They might be coming in graded this low, 27, 28, 23rd. Watch out for what this defensive backs group could become when they just force this level of competition on them. We'll see whose egos work. We'll see who doesn't. We'll see who's got the mental toughness for sure. Starting the year, they're still the 30th ranked pass defense. I have to point that out. They just don't have... We don't know who the bodies are that are going to be part of this pass defense really at all. Other than Maxx Crosby, there's really no sign of who is doing what and where. From a run defense perspective, they definitely got the right bodies in place. From the defensive line, definitely in the linebackers, and even in the defensive back run support. They got enough there where they're going to have significant impact in that sense. Then the defensive coordinator, of course, really great for the 23rd ranked defense going into the year. I think that's a pretty good grade considering the level of question marks we've talked about this entire time. Schedule perspective, for some reason, I checked multiple sites for this. They're Vegas over under 6.5 wins. The over all day. Even without the over. They get Jacksonville, Tennessee at home. They get Cleveland at home. They start the year against New England, which New England's still going to be working out some stuff there. They get the Colts midway through the year. Granted, it's on the road, but still the Colts. They get the Bears early in the year while they're still trying to figure stuff out. The Chargers, I think that they could maybe steal one of those games. Same thing against Denver. Same thing against Kansas City. I think they could 2 to 3 division wins right there. So there's no reason why this shouldn't be a 7-win team. Especially, you get Houston late in the year on the road. You get that last game of the year against Kansas City where who knows how meaningful that game is going to be for Kansas City. You get the Giants towards the end of the year who, I'm a Giants fan. For all intents and purposes, that could be Jackson Dart or Jameis Winston starting, and it's chaos. It's a fired head coach with Mike Kafka being the interim or whatever. That could be a chaotic game as well if all things don't go well for the Giants. You're really only stuck with having to play Washington and Philly on the road, which stinks. And then you get the road games in your division where you're in the hardest division in the league. But I would go over. I would still go over. I think 7-10 is a very realistic record for this team. They are overall my 15th ranked team, 16th ranked head coach, 7th offense, 23rd defense. Just a team that has that has some competition that they need to worry about. And I think as much as any other team as the season progresses, barring a Maxx Crosby, Geno Smith injury, they're going to get better and better and be a harder and harder out every single week, even for a lot of those better teams. So I'd watch out for them. I would. There you have it, my number 15 team, the Vegas Raiders, the Oakland Raiders, the Los Angeles Raiders, whatever you want to call them. If you're old school like me, you can't help but call them Oakland still, and that's fine. They're the Vegas Raiders, and they're my 15th ranked team. I say that again. Redundancy all over the place. It's been a long day. It's been a long video. I appreciate you guys being here for the long haul. And if you can hit that long button that says subscribe on it, and if you can hit that thumbs up with the long thumb on it, you can do that for me too. And we'll just worry about shortening other things up, like how many hours I work at my real job because I don't have ads yet. So the subscriptions and the likes will help change all that for me, and I hope I can, and I will see you guys next time.